Bam! MC is in the house. What's up, folks? My name is Justin Garcia, also known as Master Chim, and welcome to the Warrior Stream. I'm here every Wednesday at noon Eastern Standard Time, taking a topic, deep diving, having a good time while doing it, and got a good topic planned for today. Before we get into that, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you guys have not yet taken my leadership alignment assessment, link is in the description. You know, these last couple of shows, and I've been putting out content recently, really getting at the root cause of why I think this assessment is so important. Or I should say, the assessment addresses something in men that I think is very important. I think the assessment's a great tool to be able to use it. I've seen a couple of people on the list of people who have taken the assessment as people who have also participated on my content. And so those of you guys that have taken it already, feel free to give me some feedback in the comments of what you think about it so far. But it's free. It's 3 minutes. Links in the description. If you're not getting my emails, masterchimletter.com. I send it every day. And every single day I have a quote of the day, a different take on a different topic. A lot of times it just gives me the ability to reach people directly and expound upon ideas that I'm usually either limited to in size or in depth, I'll say, on social media platforms. So definitely something you want to check out. So what do we got going on here? Jesse, what's up, brother man? Good to see you. Aaron, good to see you. And Jamie, my other operative up in Canada. Hope all is well. As you guys are popping on and I see that number going up, feel free to say what's up. I'd love to hear who's hanging out with us. So today, I have a topic that it's been pretty, I guess, in the way I am, if you guys have been following me for a while, I tend to have these arcs of focus. And right now, the vulnerability of the brain and just how powerfully we could be impacted by being exposed to certain content, not necessarily opting into it or internalizing it, studying it, but just being exposed to it. Like our brain has a vulnerability. And this whole thing was kicked off by seeing just how significant a candidate Mamdani was in New York for the mayoral race. Turns out he just won. So this is certainly at the epicenter of what I'm talking about. I'm not going to talk about the politics of New York electing a socialist to be its mayor. As far as I'm concerned, New York deserves what it gets. There is a certain level of inevitability to this decline, which I've spoken about before. But today I want to really focus on exactly how this happens and how some of us, we could be adamantly opposed to a position and through a series of exposures wind up eventually getting to the point where we're not only defending it, but we could also get to the point where we feel like we're the ones who designed the position, or we've always been connected to this position. And that sort of disconnect from where we once were is just how the brain works. All right. So I remember a couple of years ago, I think it was the first time I shared a video that I saw. I don't know if you guys remember the mentalist, Darren Brown, a British guy. He used to have a TV show, and it was usually Darren Brown something. Like he had a bunch of different runs. But anyway, there's one episode. He had these two ad men that were going to come on to the show. They were going to meet him at an office, and they were going to come up with a logo and a tagline for this business idea he had. He sent a driver to pick these two guys up from the hotel they were at, drove them to the office building where Darren was. They came up. He, did the whole meet and greet. And he said, okay, I'm going to give you guys an hour to design a logo and a tagline for this business idea I have. And the idea was like a pet funeral service, something like that. And he said, you guys come up with your own ideas. He had a bunch of, before we had whiteboards, we had like those pads, those oversized pads. I don't even know what the fuck they're called, but whatever. And he said, so you guys could do that, brainstorm amongst yourselves. I'll come back in an hour. He goes, before I go, though, I'm going to give you this envelope. And I want you to put this envelope on the desk right there, put it under something so it's weighed down. You can see that nobody's going to touch it. I'm not going to touch it again. So they were like, all right, they took the thing, they put it in, then they went to work. They come up with this idea, and I'll find the link. I'll put it in the description later on. I think it's Darren Brown, admin, might find it. And what's up, Johnny? I see you. And so he left for an hour. He came back, and they came up with this idea of like this bear with like a halo, I think, with wings, like playing a harp. And it was like at the pearly gates or something. And the tagline was something like where good pets go to die or something to that effect. And it was like that thing that they presented him when he came back was like after multiple iterations that they had gone through. So he was like, oh, all right, that's curious. That's interesting to see. And then he asked one of the guys, the envelope that I gave you that's been on a table the whole time in front of you? Yeah. Can you open it? Just want to show you something interesting. So the guy, the admin, not Darren, picked it up, opened it. And it was the images that they had on the thing, right? So obviously those of us that enjoy, illusionists and magic and, mentalists and all this stuff, it's fairly entertaining. But to me, the even more valuable entertaining part of it was, and this is what I like about Darren Brown, is he got into how he did it. And one of the things that happened when these ad men were picked up from the hotel that morning is the route from them getting picked up to them getting dropped off at the building was populated with these sort of subconscious subliminal messages and messaging. There was the picture of the bear with the harp in a window, a store window. There were a bunch of kids that were crossing the street with their teacher, and they all had on a t-shirt, a uniform t-shirt that had a picture of the pearly gates. The phrase where good pets go to die was put in multiple places. And the driver obviously was told to stop at this light, stop at this stop sign, make sure you're on this lane and this. And when you go back and look at the path that they took, you could see that the suggestion was strongly, effectively made through all of those mechanisms for these two guys to feel that they organically created and came up with these outputs. I'd always been infatuated with that particular vulnerability of the brain to be influenced that way. And there's been a lot of content, a lot of people over the years who have sort of made their name by, entertaining people through this means or, speaking about it, what have you. But for me, I think the applications of this, what I would say vulnerability is, the applications are much bigger than just the entertainment part of it. So I have a framework that I created just to sort of snapshot this process. I had, my mastermind group this week, I had written an entire article on this. I had an audio version of the article. I created an explainer video that's on the mastermind. But then Mamdani won today. And it's like, you know what? I need to fucking vent about this. I need to put this out there because although these are certainly the types of things that I do with my mastermind guys, it's also something that I think I would feel like I was being inauthentic if I wasn't putting this out there to people that follow my stuff otherwise. So it's called the FADE framework. I literally, like an hour ago, was yelling at my mastermind guys. A couple of them had not yet seen this stuff. And I was like, what the fuck are you doing? You got to watch. I want them to watch all my stuff, but they got to read this article. I was telling them. And I'm just going to go over it here. I didn't prepare any of the slides or anything. And I wonder if I could share this even. Let me see if I could share this image. If I can, I will. If not, then it is what you make of it. All right, I might be able to pull this off. Bam! All right, I think you guys could see that. Somebody tell me in the comments if you guys could see that clearly. Because I don't think I could zoom in or anything. This is literally a screenshot from the explainer video that I made for them. All right, Jesse says he could see it. Awesome. Right. So the fade framework or process, I put framework in the article, process in the video, whatever. But here's what it is. And I decided, on an acronym with familiarization, acceptance, distortion, and embodiment. But there are psychological phenomenons, right? I guess biases or mechanisms of our psychology that are behind each one of these, and I'll get into that. But basically, there is a step-by-step process by which somebody is exposed to information that they have, and I'll use the example of an adverse reaction or position or reactivity to things, something that somebody doesn't like. And then there is this process by which it gets to the point where people find themselves defending the thing that they once liked, even getting to the point in some cases where they feel they were the author or the architect of this thing. So we're going to start off, and you see everything here. If I had this time to do the slides, I would have, but that's the whole thing. So if you got to go, there it is. I'm going to go over this thing, but there it is. And it starts off with David, what's up? Appreciate that. You're on Saxo. What's up, darling? And Niles. Is it Niles or Niles? Say first way or second way? Niles or first way, Niles second way. Because you're here every week, and I don't want to keep fucking up your name. But starting off with familiarization. So repeated exposure to something, right? And we're going to pick something that you don't like, right? So something we could say we hate. If you are exposed to it over and over again, the brain reduces its reactivity because the reactivity is meant to sort of have us prevent some sort of bad outcome. That's why we're reactive to these things, because it represents bad outcomes. But if we are repeatedly exposed to it over and over, you're eventually going to get to the point where there's no reason to be upset about it. There's no reason to have this reaction. In other words, what the reaction is trying to protect you from is provenly false. It's provenly inaccurate, right? Who is this? Why is this fucking... How do I ban people? Look at this bitch. Will you get out of here? Talking about Dr. something or other. I don't know how to ban them, guys, or I would. I don't know, though. Do I get more engagement because these fucking idiots are on here? Anyway, so you become familiar with something, and as you become familiar with it, that reaction that is meant to protect us, we sort of redefine. It's just we see it and we're telling ourselves, okay, I keep seeing this bad thing that I'm worried about never happens. Maybe I should revisit the reactivity. And it sort of desensitizes us to it, right? And that's what that process is. The root cause from a psychological perspective or psychology perspective is habituation. Now, the habituation part of it is our brain is looking to save energy. Our brain is looking to, budget its energy. And when we have a reaction that is unnecessary, it's unwarranted, it's unsupported by the feedback that we're getting, the brain is going to allot less energy to it. So if it's familiar because of repeated exposure, it must not be a threat. And if it's not a threat, we don't have to put all these systems online to prepare for a potential threat. And so we just wind up becoming desensitized, right? And that's the familiarization, right? So this says that We're having trouble posting on Facebook. So I hope you guys on Facebook could see, but whatever. I just got a thing pop up on the screen. So anyway, so that's the familiarization. Next is, right, so familiarization, remember, where I'll read the thing here. Exposure reduces reactivity. Habituation is the psychological process by which that happens. Too much energy gets us ready for a threat. If we determine something's not a threat because we keep seeing it and nothing happens, then we reduce the amount of energy. It becomes a little bit more normalized, right? And we become desensitized to it. So next, we have the acceptance. Now, in acceptance, I'll read the caption, familiarity feels like truth. So the second part of it is we tend to prefer or like or even validate something that we are familiar with. So if we recognize it and we're familiar with it, we tend to become more comfortable around it to the point where we consider it to be more valuable, and that could eventually mean more truthful. This is the right way, is often said by people who are describing something that is just the familiar way, when you expose it to a little scrutiny. So we tend to like what we recognize is part of this acceptance stage of the process. And the psychological term, I have it written down here so I don't fuck up any of these names, is called the mere exposure effect. So the mere exposure effect is really just a way of describing this process by which, because we're recognizing something as being safe, because it's familiar, we begin to process and escalate that into concluding, because it's safe, because it's familiar, it must be good and it must be truthful, right? So in the first step, we got familiar with something to the point where we stop reacting to it. We become desensitized. There are still, if I see two men kissing, I want to throw up. I try not to see men kissing because it's going to make me throw up. I don't throw up, but feel like I'm going to throw up. But if I am continuously exposed to it, it's going to be no big deal. I used to work in a funeral home. Without getting into any graphic details, let's just say that I was familiar with a lot of things after working there than I was before working there that were just no big deal. So we become familiar with it. Then we start to accept it because it's familiar, because it's not a threat. It might be good. And because it might be good, it's going to eventually feel like it's right and it's truthful. So the acceptance stage has us start vying for a position or establishing this position that this thing that I used to once be reactive to now might actually be true. We get to the third stage, distortion. Reading the caption here, beliefs bend to reduce tension. So what is it reducing tension between the position you had before and this position that's beginning to form because of the acceptance stage? When we are holding these two positions that are incompatible, it is called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance, when it is reduced, the psychological term is called cognitive dissonance reduction. Nothing fancy there. But what it means at this stage is your brain starts to create narratives and pockets of blind spots to allow these positions to not create as much tension as they once would have. When the internal conflict builds, and I'm reading from the article here, the mind rewrites its stance to stay comfortable, preferring harmony over consistency. The brain wants to be safe more than it wants to be true. This idea of seeking truth is not a biologically viable concept and abstraction. There is no abstract value to truth, to the brain as an organ in our body, right? It's just trying to conserve energy. It's trying to drive systems to the point where we could do what our bodies are meant to do. There's some debate where that is. So I'll leave that open-ended, right? But there's nothing in our brain that tells us we should be seeking truth more than we should be seeking comfort. So in this third stage, we are distorting the relationship we have with these two otherwise incompatible positions to reduce the cognitive dissonance that they represent otherwise, right? Now we get to the last stage. Now the last stage is embodiment. This is something that a concept that I've dealt with in other applications over the years. And this is where, because the idea now is, I'll read the caption first, the idea feels like your own. Because the idea feels natural, it feels personal, it gets to the point where it feels like it is actually self-created. Reading from my notes, the root cause of this is called misattribution of fluency. Misattribution of fluency. As mental fluency in a topic grows, the brain confuses repetition with authorship, and it turns outside influence into what we conceive to be original thought. There's a point where we will become so connected to an idea. We internalize this idea so effectively that we no longer are connected to the conscious installation process, which means we have a belief that we once installed. Prior to that, we might have even rejected that belief. We went through this process, we eventually installed it. But now in this last stage of embodiment, this is where we've actually had it for so long, we sever the sort of origin story of these beliefs to the point where it's just something that we believe, and we could very easily conflate that with something that we've created. So this is how you will have yourself at one point completely opposed to a position, and then find yourself after a spell supporting it as if it was your own idea, or as if you always supported this idea. Now, when you look at this process, what's the value of it? Like, why are we this susceptible? Well, there is a sort of evolutionary aspect or application of this vulnerability, right? Because another way we can look at a vulnerability, maybe if we look at all vulnerabilities, a subset of these vulnerabilities, we could say are investments, right? When we open our front door, we're making the security of our home more vulnerable, right? We're lowering the security of our home. We're more vulnerable by opening the door. But nobody can get in and out if you don't open the door, right? There's some debate as to the origin, but I would say generally it's accepted. The ritual of shaking hands is a physical, symbolic gesture to show that we don't have weapons. Like, there is a vulnerability that way. When you look at samurai, the formality of how they would sit in a session, in a meeting, and I wasn't there, but I've read this over the years, how they would place their sword. A samurai that had great trust for their host that they were sitting in front of would take their sword and put it on their right side, whereas a samurai who was not as trustworthy, or the nature of the meeting wasn't that informal or casual, they would take out their sword and place it on their left, meaning the left, it was easier to draw. If you were to put your sword on your right, you're putting yourself in a non-optimal position to draw your sword. So that was a gesture of vulnerability and trust. So there are times where vulnerability could be an investment, but this is still a vulnerability that we could suffer consequences that go against our best interests. My kids, I mention it to my mastermind guys, my coaching students, now you guys more publicly. It's not enough to watch these ideas that we disagree with and chastise them and insult them and mock them and do all the things we do to show that we're on the other side of this. just the engagement will familiarize yourself with the other side. And there will be a point where just from the exposure alone, and now mind you, with this piece, I am not putting a value judgment on this. I'm just describing the process as it occurs. So when you have a level of exposure in arguing with another side, understand that their side will become more personalized, will become more energy neutral at first. It will stop giving you the reactivity. When was the last time, you guys walked down the block somewhere or the road? Let me get rid of this. And you saw a tranny. Now we have new names for them, right? We have the more palatable PC names. They're transgenders. They're trans men, trans women. Prior to that, we would call them transvestites or cross-dressers, right? Maybe prior to that, we would just call them homos or any other derogatory term for homos. But as we become more familiar, even our language for them changes. Trans language, if you will. And it's really just because of the repetition of exposure. It's become normalized. Sometimes this is a good thing. You look at different, ethnic groups dealing with one another. There's a point where it's like we're all in America in a neighborhood, and there's a diverse group of ethnic groups. It's going to help if everybody doesn't fucking panic and violence isn't on site if we see somebody from the other group. There's a point where we realize, they stay over here, we stay over here, and we don't fight. They're good enough over there. We don't have any problems. There's something where you functionally get along. You can look at prisons. There's different ethnic groups, but they find ways to deal with one another. It's not you're different, we're going to fight. So there is a functional aspect to this changes that the human brain makes through nothing but exposure. But my point of telling you this is that it doesn't require your permission. The more you are exposed to a stimulus, the more you will internalize the identity of the stimulus. We look at New York City right now that just voted for a socialist to be its mayor, a 34-year-old Muslim socialist. You do not get to that point without collectively seeing young people with authority. That takes care of the 34-year-old thing. Muslim culture and Muslim individuals and knowing Muslims makes them appear more compatible, less scary, more normal. And socialists, how many years ago we all making fun of, AOC or these other socialists or Bernie Sanders before that? You go back decades, the government used to hunt people like this. So how do we go from there to here? It has nothing to do with a philosophical change that came by way of introspection or some new information, some contemplative process that we finally figured out that this is okay. No, we just aren't repulsed by it anymore. The majority of people collectively are inherently peaceful, are inherently accepting. They'd rather, and I said it before in a different application, they would rather comfort and consistency over truth. Can't we all just get along? No, the answer is. The answer is no, we can't all get along. But how do we try? We keep exposing people to the people they don't get along with. And at some point, these people become humanized. If you look at the architects of war who are looking to design and construct a narrative to get the support of a people to engage in some sort of foreign conflict, one of the building blocks of that campaign is dehumanizing the people that they want to attack violently. By dehumanizing these people, we sort of lower the friction of the populace supporting the violence. There'll be plenty of people who will say, I support the death penalty. This guy's a child molester. He molested all these children. He raped these women. He did all these atrocious things. He should be put to death. It's like, okay, here's a knife. Or here's a gun even. Let you out a little safe. Like, here's a gun. Well, I'm not going to do it. But I don't understand why you would support it being done, but at the same time refuse to do it. Because it's the friction. It's the proximity. It is not yet to the point where it's gone through this process where they embody their belief. They could share it, but it's not yet their own at a level that they're willing to act in accordance with it. So when you're trying to get a populace to support a war, you have to dehumanize those people to make sure that this doesn't hurt the people enough for them to just be averse to the violence itself. No, these have to be the bad guys. These have to be people that need violence done to them. The consequences of not doing it is going to be dire. You got to create the narrative that allows people to go along with it. Well, it could also be done in reverse. You could take an enemy and you could enact a humanization campaign where we humanize them. Now, all of the kumbaya hippies that are watching right now are going, well, that's good. That's how it's peaceful. Like, no, this is how we have fucking Trojan horses. This is how we have people that wind up being bad actors and spies or just bad actors representing other interests within the tribal walls. So just inherently dehumanizing people is a psychological tactic to get people to go along with levels of conflict they otherwise wouldn't. Dehumanizing people is to get people to reject conflict with people that they may have prior had a willingness to engage in escalated levels of conflict with. But now it becomes that they're too humanized, they're too neighborly. But each one of those processes says nothing about the moral implications or the value of them on its face. It's really, you want to let good guys in the wall, you want to keep bad guys out. But these processes that can be exploited through the vulnerability of the brain are not connected to that morality. Every once in a while, we get somebody that we had these, for some reason, just really strong negative feelings toward. And we have some experiences. We're like, you know what? The guy's not that bad. Next thing you know, you guys might become buddies. That's a good example of how this vulnerability works out. But sometimes New York City elects a fucking communist to be its mayor. This process is biological. This process is a function of the brain. When you are trying to establish rapport with somebody, you try to spotlight the overlap, right? And what that means is we try to draw attention to the commonalities. It's like, hey, you watch the UFC? I watch the UFC. What do you think? Who are your fighters? Oh, yeah, I like him. I really like him. I also like this other guy. What do you think about it? And we use that as a sort of the connection that we then build into the bridge of alliance, of a strong alliance. A strong bridge could bear a lot of weight, and that represents symbolically what a strong alliance looks like. But it starts with the commonality. Well, there's a point where if I could start humanizing somebody who is, for all intents and purposes, a bad idea, it starts resembling the way that people will treat family members, where you'll have, let's say, a sibling or a cousin or somebody who's bad news, who's a loser, who, has a drug problem or, is stealing or whatever it is. And you say all of these things when trying to identify what he's about. But at the end of it, you go, yeah, but it's my cousin. So in other words, you have this connection that exists outside the bounds of what would otherwise be criteria that would sever a connection with somebody. Yeah, but he's my brother. Yeah, but it's my dad. Yeah, but it's my mom. Yeah, but whatever the case is. Well, this is the process that starts to happen. It's like he's a socialist. Yeah, but he wants to. Yeah, but he wants, like, wait a minute. He's a fucking socialist. If you guys have not heard me say before, socialism is to communism as HIV is to AIDS. Enough people become socialist, next thing you know, you're a communist as a country. There is no other way. This is a linear progression. This is an escalation, one of the other. So if we don't have, so how do you combat this, right? I may have mentioned that intro, but I didn't flesh it out. So let's get to that now. And this will be the last thing I go over. How do we combat this? We need to have a code. We need to understand who we are. We need to understand what our vision is, what our mission looks like. When you look at an individual action, is this something I would do or something I would not do? What is the context that I determine one from the other? Well, when you start actually articulating, it doesn't have to be on a list, although lists help. But if you start thinking to yourself and really just listing, this is why I would do this instead of that. This, and you have at the end of that process this list of things that is really a collection of your code, your codes, right? The whole thing being the codex. When you have your personal codex, that is, you guys have heard me use the term before, a transcendent alliance. It is a transcendent value. Transcendent not because it exists outside of the tangible world, transcendent because you can't fucking touch it. Because it is out of the reach of your emotional tendencies at any given moment. Let's say a loved one gets into an accident and you think they're going to die. And through some miraculous series of events, they pull out of this surgery that had a 3% chance of being successful, and they're going to have a full recovery. You just get this news. The impossible just happened. And in that state, you see somebody who is a convicted murderer, pedophile, like the worst type of person you could meet, and the person needs help doing something. This energy could change the way you deal with this situation. And I'm not being too specific here because I don't want to be on the hook for fleshing out an inaccurate hypothetical. But the thing is, this person, this bad person, is asking you for something that you would never do. But because you are so elevated in your state, because of this seemingly miraculous occurrence, your state might make you say, okay, I'll do it. But on its face, this is still a bad fucking idea. But because you have this surplus of energy, it's now modifying how you are navigating your life. So if we're looking at how do we leverage this vulnerability, right, that I describe as the fade framework, we have to have a belief system that we could turn to orient us when we feel that our positions are eroding. I talk a lot about alignment, right? That is one of the currencies of progress in the 3-road system, in my coaching mastermind. It's the alignment that a man has between who he is as an individual, who his people are that he's connected to, and how he creates value, purpose. Some applications, it's income. Like that 3rd road represents basically the work that is done. When there is a lack of alignment, you will see a sort of compensatory reaction from an individual. He will look to compensate. And when he compensates to try and undo the baggage or pain of the misalignment, that is when he is most vulnerable to these corrosive vulnerabilities of the brain. That's how the guy who's stressed out at work, whose wife just left him, tries drugs for the first time, or goes on a weekend bender and winds up losing the house, or some big permanent consequence to his dealing with a temporary obstruction. When we are aligned, we understand these values. We understand this is what I stand for, this is what I stand against. And if that position is going to evolve, as it should, not only as it will, but as it should, it is done from a position and perspective of power, not a reactive adjustment to just deal with the pain that we have, the discomfort that we have, because we haven't yet done the work to align those three roads. I hope I'm making sense. I saw today that fucking commie was elected. We went to the same high school, by the way. I went to a couple of high schools, but the first 2 years I went to Bronx High School of Science, and that's where he went for high school. And it's like, yeah, he's much younger than me, obviously, but when you look at that type of educational environment, it's like, yeah, a lot of smart, left-leaning people. Neil deGrasse Tyson, black science guy, is another guy that went to that school. It's like you see it. And you start to see why I only lasted there about 2 years. It's like, yeah, that kind of makes sense too. But this is what I do. This is what gets me up in the morning, keeps me fired up when I'm doing my work. It's figuring out these frameworks, right? So I'm going to bring it up on the screen one more time. So the FADE process, or in the article I called it FADE framework, it's 4 stages. You have familiarization. Familiarization is the psychological habituation process, right? So it's the brain conserves energy by reducing its responses to things it encounters repetitively, because what is familiar eventually gets interpreted as not being a threat and therefore being safe, right? So the first thing that happens with a position that we don't like is we become familiar and we stop reacting to it. Then we start accepting it, right? And this is the mere exposure effect. That's what it's called in psychology. And this is where the mind starts to conflate the ease and familiarity and recognition of something starts to be conflated with it is safe, therefore it's probably true. If it's here and I'm being exposed to it and there's no bad consequence, I shouldn't overreact. That's the first stage. Now that I'm not overreacting, I'm seeing this thing, it's probably true. It probably has value. Then we get to the point, the third stage here, where it's distortion, right? And that's cognitive dissonance reduction. Now, distortion is when we take these otherwise two incompatible positions, the one we're currently building, right, of this looking at this thing that we once hated in a new way, like that one, and the original position we had of this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. And our brain says we got to find a way to allow these things to not fight anymore. So it will actually design a story and modify your beliefs to reduce the tension between these two positions. So the cognitive dissonance does not exist at the level it once would have. And then finally, the last stage, embodiment. This is the misattribution of fluency. This is when the idea, because not only do we not have a bad reaction to it, we're so familiar with and exposed to it, we start to actually have good reactions and think it's more truthful. Now that we think it's truthful, we also, because of the cognitive dissonance reduction, we don't have anything to push against this truthful position. So we internalize it. And then it gets to the point where we've internalized it for so long, so effectively, that its origin story now gets severed from its identity. And we hold the position as if we have always held it. In some cases, getting to the point where we think we actually created it. We think we authored this position. No, I've always said that. I've always believed in this. I for years I've been saying that's what it is. That's what you got to accept. But then upon further inspection, we see a video of this individual saying all that nonsense, saying something completely opposite to what he's espousing now. The tendency is to say, oh, he's fucking lying. Well, this is an example of somebody saying something that isn't true without intentionally, consciously lying. It's a vulnerability of the brain. Remember, this vulnerability has us connect with people that we otherwise would have rejected. It has us sometimes become acclimated to new positions that through time have proven to be not something that we should build, a position against. So there are a lot of good applications to this. We wouldn't have it otherwise, right? It's part of the evolutionary process of navigating the environment that we evolved in. But we also have to be conscious of how we could be exploited. Especially, not only does vulnerability exist, but knowledge of the vulnerability exists, right? I called it the exhaust port this morning on the Mastermind call, talking about how they blew up the Death Star. White Boy Pat was on this morning. He said, no, it's the thermal exhaust port. So it's like that thermal exhaust port. That's how other people see that, see this vulnerability in us. So we have to be aware. That means stop watching people that you disagree with. Stop. And I don't mean to be in an echo chamber, right? Because it's easily just dismissed to me advocating for that. What I mean is exposing yourself to the same position repetitively will endear you eventually to that position. Like, this is fact. I'm not saying to surround yourself just with people that agree with you. What I'm saying, just understand that arguing over the same things with the same people over and over again is going to put you on their side eventually. How do I know? The latest example, how the fuck did New York elect a communist? Right? All right, guys, we're going to stop it there. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me. I talked about alignment, being the thing that adds to this vulnerability. If you look in the description, I have an assessment. I spent a lot of time developing the questions. It's free. It'll take about 3 minutes. The logic behind the questions, the results you get based on how you answer these questions, I invested a ton of energy and time into. And I'm very proud not only of the assessment, but the feedback that I've gotten so far. Some of you guys have been on it. And I hope you guys enjoyed the outcome of having done it. But link is in the description. You can check that out. I appreciate you guys. I'll be here next week. You guys know, noon Eastern Standard Time. Eastern Standard Time, not any other time. And anything that I spoke about, I'm sorry, I'm thinking and speaking at the same time. Anything mentioned on this show is probably in the description, so check it out. Get my emails, take the assessment, blah, blah, blah. All right, I'll see you guys next week. I appreciate you. And as always, brothers and sisters, pressure to power.